Hi, this is a new episode on Web Intelligence's Deep Dive podcast. We are Mark and Rita. Imagine for a moment that your biggest rival just spent, I don't know, $50 million building an entirely new market category.
Oh, wow.
Right. Like they spent years educating the consumer, fighting the regulators, and building out this massive supply chain infrastructure.
That is a huge sunk cost.
Exactly. Now imagine you could just step in, completely bypass that $50 million learning curve, and permanently inherit all of that effort for yourself. Basically, you just absorb their score into your own.
That's almost terrifying if you're the rival.
It really is. So today we're decoding the mechanics behind this concept. It's called the redistribution league. And we're going to explore the, invisible forces that determine why some companies completely dominate their markets while others just, well, vanish.
It is such a phenomenal concept, and it genuinely shatters that traditional zero-sum way we're basically all taught to look at competition.
Yeah, it completely flips the board.
It really does. And to unpack all this, we are diving into a highly original and honestly incredibly dense work today. It's called My Strategic Mind: Practical Theories for Competitive Success by Amir L.
And for you listening, this is currently available on Amazon. You can grab it in both Kindle and paperback formats.
Which I highly recommend doing, because what makes it such a vital resource is really how it's constructed. I mean, it flat out refuses to be just another dry academic text.
It really does. The framing device it uses right at the start is so clever.
Yeah, it grounds all these massive, abstract, strategic frameworks in really compelling, relatable stories. Like, the book actually opens with a grandfather sitting on a balcony.
Right, just talking to his grandson.
Exactly, explaining the true origins of Amazon Web Services, AWS, to his grandson, David.
It's a great hook.
It is. And from that story, Section 1 builds out the core principles of strategy formation. Then Section 2 kind of plunges you into the gritty day-to-day mechanics of corporate intelligence.
And then it caps it all off with that massive real-world appendix, right? The one on the future of Europe.
Yeah, the EU 2035. It's a huge market research piece. The structure is incredibly deliberate.
Because the connecting paragraphs between the chapters actually act as literal bridges.
Right. They smoothly transition you from this high-level academic theory straight down to the, boots-on-the-ground reality of daily managerial practice.
So our mission for you today is to basically extract the most crucial tools from this work. By the time we finish this deep dive, you'll have a practical toolkit to elevate how you analyze your own industry, anticipate your competitors' moves, and stress test your own strategies.
So let's actually start where the book starts, with that grandfather and grandson on the balcony discussing AWS. Because AWS wasn't born out of some grand visionary desire to conquer the internet infrastructure market.
Not at all. In the early 2000s, Amazon was facing an absolute operational nightmare internally.
Oh, completely. And it was a nightmare that the retail customers couldn't even see.
So the text highlights the staggering metric. At that time, Amazon's software engineering teams were trying to scale rapidly, right? They wanted to build new search filters, better recommendation engines.
Smoother checkout processes, all the stuff that makes Amazon, Amazon.
Exactly. But every single time a team wanted to launch a new feature, they hit this massive bottleneck.
Right. Before they could write a single line of code that a customer would actually interact with, they had to spend roughly 70% of their time on what the book calls invisible plumbing.
Wait, 70%? That is wild.
Yeah, 70% of a highly paid software engineer's time.
So we're talking about, what, weeks wasted just setting up physical servers and stuff?
Exactly. Configuring storage drives, preparing database environments, writing complex deployment scripts. It was incredibly inefficient.
Which means only 30% of their time was actually dedicated to the feature itself.
Yeah. So when David, the grandson in the story, hears this, he points out what, most of us would think. He says it just sounds like a terrible process problem.
Right, like a basic operations issue. Fix the process, fix the problem.
But that observation is actually what allows the grandfather to introduce one of the most critical frameworks in the entire book. He draws on the work of Harvard University's Professor Michael Porter.
Ah, Porter, classic.
Yep. The grandfather explains the absolute necessity of distinguishing between operational effectiveness and strategy, because this is where most leaders get completely confused.
Let's obviously break that distinction down, because it's pretty much the foundation for everything else we're going to discuss today.
Go for it.
So operational effectiveness is essentially just doing the same things your competitors are doing, but doing them better, faster, or cheaper.
Right. It's just adopting industry best practices.
Exactly. So if Amazon's engineers were wasting time on databases,
Mhm.
fixing that bottleneck is just an operational fix. It's totally necessary, but it's not a strategy.
Precisely. Strategy, according to the Porter framework used in the book, is not about being the best at some generic process.
It's about choosing a completely unique way to compete.
Yes, it's about finding a distinctive position that delivers a, unique type of value to a specific set of customers. And it requires trade-offs that make your company incredibly difficult to copy.
So how does that apply to the AWS story?
Well, around 2003, Jeff Bezos and Annie Jassy held a retreat at Bezos's home. They looked at this internal 70% plumbing problem and realized they needed an internet operating system,
I really love the analogy the book uses here.
the Lego bricks.
Yeah, just like your laptop has an operating system so that Microsoft Word doesn't have to figure out how to physically spin your hard drive, Amazon needed standardized internal services.
Right, so instead of building a new database from scratch every time, a development team would just call up a centralized storage service via an API.
They were building digital Lego bricks for their own teams.
But the real leap, the jump from operational effectiveness to pure strategy, happened when they realized those internal Lego bricks could be rented out to anyone.
They decided to externalize their own internal solution.
Exactly. But entering the enterprise technology space in the mid-2000s meant going up against absolute titans. We're talking IBM, Oracle, Hewlett-Packard.
If Amazon had just tried to sell servers the way IBM sold servers, they would have been absolutely crushed.
Without a doubt, they needed a unique position.
And this is where the specific strategic choices become so fascinating to me, because the legacy companies, the Oracles and IBMs, built their entire business models around selling massive multi-million-dollar monolithic systems.
Oh, yeah, they were whining and dining corporate chief information officers, the CIOs, over these long, agonizing sales cycles.
Right, like 18 months just to close a deal.
Yeah.
Amazon looked at that landscape and made a deliberate, honestly, incredibly risky strategic choice. They completely ignored the CIO.
They bypassed the executive suite entirely. The strategy was to target the individual software developer.
That's brilliant.
It was. Amazon envisioned a world where a lone developer, sitting in a dorm room or like a coffee shop anywhere on the planet, could pull out a personal credit card and instantly spin up server capacity.
Capacity that rivaled a Fortune 500 company.
Exactly.
But that choice required a total paradigm shift in pricing, didn't it?
Oh, massive.
Sure.
The old guard required, a $50,000 upfront capital expenditure just to get a server rack delivered to your building.
Yeah, that's a huge barrier to entry.
So Amazon introduced a pay-as-you-go model. You pay by the hour for computing power or by the gigabyte for storage. It's exactly like an electric bill.
You turn the lights on, you pay. You
Yeah.
turn them off, you stop paying.
And this specific combination, developer focus plus utility pricing, ignited the famous Amazon flywheel effect.
Because the low barrier to entry attracted thousands of developers, right?
Exactly. And that massive influx of usage allowed Amazon to justify building more data centers and buying hardware in just unprecedented bulk.
Which dramatically lowered Amazon's own infrastructure costs.
Yep. And instead of hoarding that margin, they passed those savings right back to the customer as voluntary price cuts.
Yeah.
The text notes that AWS has reduced its prices over 100 times since its inception.
That is insane. And the beauty of this strategy is how deeply it permeated their internal culture, too.
Oh, absolutely. They didn't just change their pricing. They restructured the human beings writing the code.
Right. They instituted the concept of two pizza teams, meaning no internal engineering team should ever be so large that two pizzas couldn't feed them.
So you're looking at squads of maybe 8 to 10 people max.
And the operational mantra for these teams was, you build it, you run it.
Which completely eliminates the classic corporate handoff.
Right, because in a traditional enterprise, a developer writes the code and throws it over the wall to some IT operations team to manage.
But at AWS, if you wrote the code for a new database feature, and that database crashes at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, your pager goes off.
We fix it.
You fix it.
Yeah.
This creates intense accountability and forces teams to build highly resilient systems right from day one.
What's really brilliant is how all these pieces, the developer focus, the utility pricing, the two pizza teams, the API structure, they all interlock.
Porter calls this fit. It's a coherent system where every single activity reinforces the core strategic position.
And because it was so interlocked, it was nearly impossible for IBM or Oracle to copy it without totally cannibalizing their own highly profitable, CIO-focused sales models.
And as the book points out, AWS managed to mature without abandoning that core position.
Right, because eventually they did need to win over massive, highly regulated enterprises and government bodies.
But they didn't change their fundamental API structure to do it. Instead, they built specialized environments, like GovCloud.
And a massive validation of the strategy was when they secured that major contract with the CIA in 2013, wasn't it?
Oh, totally. Because once a central intelligence agency publicly trusts your cloud infrastructure to handle classified data.
Yeah, it becomes nearly impossible for, like, a regional bank or a mid-sized healthcare company to claim that the cloud isn't secure enough for them.
Exactly. It completely neutralized the primary objection of the enterprise market.
But wait, there is a crucial paradox here that the grandfather in the story points out to David, and it brings us right back full circle to Porter's framework.
Yes, AWS was a masterclass in strategy for Amazon back in the 2000s. But for the vast majority of companies migrating their servers to AWS today, that move is not a strategy.
Wait, let's pause on that because that is a massive realization. If I'm the CEO of a retail chain today, and I proudly announce to my board that moving to the cloud is our new digital strategy,
You are actually misusing the word.
entirely misusing it.
Entirely. For your retail chain, moving to AWS is simply operational effectiveness.
Right, because I'm just adopting a modern industry best practice to reduce my capital expenditures.
Or increase your website's uptime during holiday rushes. Or improve operational flexibility. It's a smart, necessary move, but it does not give you a unique competitive advantage over another retail chain that is also using AWS.
Because they're doing the exact same thing.
Exactly. The strategy is what you sell and how you position your retail brand. The cloud is just the invisible plumbing you're using to deliver it.
That makes so much sense. So we've established that a brilliant CEO can map out a world-changing vision like AWS at a weekend retreat.
Sure.
But a vision on a whiteboard is completely useless if the middle managers running the daily operations don't know how to execute it, or if they're terrified of making decisions in ambiguous situations.
Oh, absolutely. That is the execution gap.
So how do you actually translate the theory at the top into reality down the chain?
Well, the book addresses this transition beautifully by introducing the organization's survival game.
I love this part.
It's essentially a mechanism for moving strategy from the boardroom into the trenches. It's a high-stakes simulation designed to test middle management's ability to interpret and execute the CEO's vision when faced with really complex, unforeseen environments.
And the book outlines 3 foundational pillars that a management team must possess to survive this game, right?
Yes. First, they must be able to create a common vision.
Okay.
Second, they need the capability to establish new business units from scratch in what the author calls the gray area.
And
Third, they must be able to navigate real-time ethical and professional dilemmas that threaten the company's long-term resilience.
so let's look at how the simulation actually plays out. It's structured in 2 distinct phases, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, part one is the mapping and building phase. The managers are handed a document directly from the CEO outlining a new strategic vision.
This document is their compass, right?
Exactly. The managers are then dropped into a vague, undefined market arena and told to create a comprehensive plan for a brand new business unit.
Which is incredibly stressful because in the real world, you never have all the data you want before you have to launch.
Never.
You're forcing these managers to decide which assumptions are safe to make on unknown ground. It really tests their tolerance for ambiguity and their raw courage in decision-making.
And just like a pilot in training, you need them making these decisions in a controlled environment first. The plans they create are submitted to a control team, acting as the evaluators.
And then comes part 2.
Then comes part two, which introduces the extreme scenarios. The managers receive their evaluated plans back, but the control team suddenly injects severe real-world dilemmas into the simulation.
It's literally a flight simulator for middle management.
That's the perfect analogy.
You want your pilots in the simulator when you throw a sudden, catastrophic double-engine failure at them. You want them to crash the virtual plane when the stakes are 0, rather than freezing up tomorrow morning over the Atlantic with 300 passengers on board.
Exactly. This organization survival game is doing the exact same thing for the corporate budget.
Imagine a management team submits a brilliant plan for a new hardware product, and in part 2, the control team just says, okay, a geopolitical embargo just cut off your primary microchip supplier. Your launch date is in 3 weeks. Fix it using the CEO's compass.
It's brutal, but it's necessary. And to give the managers a way to logically process these sudden crises, the author integrates Porter's 5 forces model.
How does that fit into the simulation?
Well, during the game, the five forces acts as a shared, common language for the entire company.
Yeah.
When the simulation throws a crisis at them, they don't just panic, they categorize the structural threat.
Ah, so they ask, is this crisis an increase in the bargaining power of our suppliers?
Right. Or is it a sudden threat from a new entrant? Is it intensifying rivalry among existing competitors? It de-escalates the panic by giving it a name and a category.
And then they combine that structural view with a classic SWOT analysis, right?
Oh,
Assessing
really?
strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yes. And the book uses a fantastic phrase for this. Swat it so it won't make you sweat.
SWOT it so it won't make you sweat. I love that mnemonic.
It's great. The purpose is to violently collide the internal realities of the company, your actual strengths and weaknesses, with the external pressures of the five forces, your opportunities and threats.
So by forcing managers to defend their simulated business plans against these frameworks, the CEO gets a crystal clear diagnostic of which managers actually understand the strategic vision.
And crucially, which ones fold under pressure.
But, whether you're running a simulation or trying to execute a strategy in the real world, you are entirely dependent on the quality of your data.
Absolutely.
You cannot pivot a supply chain or enter a new market blindly. You need intelligence. Which leads us to a massive economic friction point in the business world. How do companies justify the staggering cost of market research and corporate intelligence?
This is a perennial problem for executives. Intelligence is traditionally viewed by the finance department as a sunk cost.
Right, you pay $50,000 for a consultant's market report, you read it, and you just sort of hope it eventually leads to a good decision.
Exactly. And the author argues that this mindset has to change. We must transition from viewing information as a cost to treating it as a measurable strategic investment.
The book introduces a concept called IROI, or Intelligence Return on Investment, which, it feels great in theory, but how do you actually measure the return on a piece of information?
It requires turning intelligence from a passive document into a testable hypothesis.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
The text suggests utilizing methodologies like A/B testing on strategic decisions, establishing strict logic models with clear stability indicators, and crucially, conducting rigorous post-mortem analyses.
So if the intelligence unit recommends a specific market entry based on their data and you execute it, you must track the financial outcome back to that initial intelligence report.
Yes, you have to prove the math.
Okay, so you apply strict ROI metrics to your internal intelligence. But the author goes significantly further than just internal metrics.
Way further.
He proposes a highly radical model for how business intelligence is gathered and shared across the entire industry.
The shared business information marketplace.
Yes. The premise here challenges the traditional consulting models so deeply.
It does. Usually market and competitive research are hoarded. It just sits in isolated silos, trapped on hard drives inside consulting firms or corporate strategy departments.
So the author proposes a collaborative marketplace where analysts, consultants, and strategists actively pool their information assets.
But the truly disruptive part is the proposed economic model. Web Intelligency argues for the complete removal of per-item payments for these insights.
Okay, let me put on my skeptical, pragmatic business hat for a second here.
Let's hear it.
Let's debate this. In a hyper-competitive consulting world where knowledge is literally the only product you sell, why on earth would a senior strategist at a top-tier firm freely upload their hard-earned frameworks or market analyses to a shared platform? Isn't that just giving away the secret sauce for free?
It is the absolute first question any professional would ask, and the book addresses this friction directly.
Okay, how?
The logic is that by removing the transactional per-item payment, you eliminate the barrier that keeps highly valuable micro-insights hidden. The strategist isn't giving away their bespoke client strategy. They're sharing the generalized frameworks, the templates, the macro trends.
So the incentive shifts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It shifts from trying to squeeze a few $100s out of a single document download to building massive long-term intellectual capital.
So it relies on a sophisticated form of network effects.
Precisely.
If I spend 3 hours uploading a highly detailed framework on, say, the upcoming European ESG compliance regulations, I don't get paid cash for it. But tomorrow, when I'm scrambling to understand the logistics of cold chain shipping in Southeast Asia for a client, I can just pull down a masterclass template uploaded by a logistics expert in Singapore.
Yes. The currency of this marketplace isn't cash. It is the time you saved, the elevated quality of your final client proposal, and the professional reputation you're building.
Your profile in this marketplace becomes a living, dynamic portfolio of your expertise.
And consistently uploading high-tier insights attracts inbound interest, which leads to massive, lucrative consulting contracts down the line.
Yeah.
That is where the real money is made.
But the platform itself has to keep the lights on, right? If the information sharing is free, how does Web Intelligency propose monetizing the ecosystem?
Through an indirect monetization layer. The core exchange of insights is free, but they monetize the specialized tools built around that ecosystem.
Like what kind of tools?
They offer premium, private workspaces for corporate teams, custom advanced analytics dashboards that parse the marketplace data, and they facilitate highly paid collaborative consulting sprints where clients can hire the top contributors for bespoke projects.
It is essentially applying the open source software model like Linux to high-level business strategy.
Exactly.
But the text doesn't ignore the obvious hurdles, and the most glaring one to me is the free rider problem. What stops an analyst from just creating an account, downloading 100 premium frameworks, and never contributing a single sentence back?
The author is highly pragmatic about human behavior here. To combat the free rider issue, the marketplace requires a give-to-get model.
Okay, how does that work?
Your access to the deepest, most valuable tiers of information is mathematically tied to the quality and frequency of your own uploads. If you don't contribute, your access degrades.
Oh, that's smart. And that ties into the quality control dilemma, too.
Right, because if you let anyone upload anything, the marketplace quickly becomes flooded with low-effort garbage and marketing spam.
But on the flip side, if you implement a rigid academic peer review system, it takes 6 months to publish a single insight, and the data is completely obsolete by the time it goes live.
So the proposed solution is a hybrid approach. It relies on a mixture of standardized, clear templates that force contributors to organize their thoughts logically.
Combined with community-driven peer ratings, I imagine.
Exactly.
Great.
And a light layer of editorial curation to highlight the most impactful pieces.
There is one more massive hurdle we have to discuss here, though. Consultants live and die by the non-disclosure agreement, the NDA. It is the lifeblood of client trust.
It really is.
How can a strategist share an insight they gleaned from a client project without instantly violating their NDA and getting sued?
This is definitely the most delicate aspect of the marketplace. It requires very strict, standardized guidelines on how to sanitize and anonymize case studies.
Meaning they have to strip out the identifiable details.
Right. The contributor must learn how to extract the underlying analytical pattern, the abstract strategic lesson, without revealing the specific client's identity, their financial data, or their proprietary technology.
That makes sense, but it still feels risky.
It is. Because this is so sensitive, the author recommends launching this marketplace not as a global free-for-all, but starting small with focused pilot programs in specific, lower-risk domains to establish the community norms of sanitization before scaling up.
So we've explored how to formulate a strategy, how to stress test the managers executing it, and how to fuel those decisions through an intelligence marketplace.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of the hard data.
But all of this relies on logic, data, and rational frameworks. Hard data is only half the battle. We have to look at the invisible architecture of a company, the human elements.
Sassy stuff.
Exactly. How people feel, how they behave when no one is watching, and the stories they tell. Because if the internal culture is toxic or the market hates your brand, the most brilliant Porter framework in the world will not save you.
This brings us to a really fascinating section of the book that views the human element through 3 distinct analytical lenses.
Which are?
Sentiment analysis, the normalization of deviance, and narrative strategy.
Let's begin with sentiment. Because in this context, sentiment analysis is not just a vanity metric for the marketing department to track Twitter likes, right?
Not at all. It is about treating the massive emotional trail that customers and employees leave online as a high-fidelity strategic radar.
The book uses a brilliant, universally understood example to illustrate this: the massive turnaround of Domino's Pizza.
Oh, this is a classic case study in dynamic repositioning. Years ago, Domino's was facing a brutal existential crisis regarding customer sentiment.
The feedback online was vicious.
People were literally saying the pizza crust tasted like cardboard and the sauce tasted like ketchup.
Now, the standard corporate playbook when faced with that kind of vitriol is to ignore it, hide behind corporate speak, or launch a multi-million-dollar fluffy PR campaign showing happy families eating the pizza, right? Just hoping the problem goes away.
But Domino's didn't do that. They used that brutal sentiment analysis as a strategic weapon.
What did they do?
They launched a campaign where they publicly and loudly admitted that their pizza was terrible.
They showed their executives reading the harshest reviews on camera.
Yes, they validated the customer's anger, demonstrated that they understood the root cause of the failure, and promised a completely reformulated recipe from the ground up.
Let's look at the mechanics of why that works so brilliantly. By admitting their product was cardboard, they didn't just solve a PR crisis, they instantly disarmed their competitors.
Exactly. You cannot attack a brand that has already ruthlessly attacked itself.
They weaponized their own vulnerability to rebuild trust, and the market rewarded them massively for it.
And the text also highlights how Shopify uses sentiment analysis internally, which is just as powerful.
Yeah, Shopify applied this concept to their operational efficiency.
Right. Instead of just looking at the sheer volume of customer support tickets, they began analyzing the real-time tone and emotional shifts within the text of those tickets.
Oh, that's clever.
By detecting frustration and urgency in the language early, they were able to route critical incidents faster.
The book notes they used this emotional radar to cut response times for severe incidents from several hours down to under 30 minutes.
They turned the emotional state of their customers into a competitive operational weapon.
But sentiment isn't just external. We have to look at how employees behave internally, especially regarding safety and protocol.
This is where the author brings in the pioneering work of sociologist Diane Vaughan.
Specifically, her concept of the normalization of deviance.
Yes, and this is a chilling concept for any executive. Vaughan famously studied the organizational culture that led to the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster.
What did she find?
What she found was that catastrophic outcomes almost never stem from a single malicious act of sabotage. Instead, they are the result of a slow, creeping process where small, risky shortcuts are tolerated over and over again.
You ignore a minor warning sign, like an O-ring acting strangely in cold weather because the shuttle didn't blow up the last time you ignored it.
Right, so ignoring it becomes the new acceptable norm. A shortcut tolerated once becomes standard operating procedure. The deviance normalizes.
And the structural cure for this normalization of deviance, as presented in the text, relies on the work of Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson.
The establishment of psychological safety.
Because if a junior engineer sees a flaw in a process, but they are too terrified to speak up because the culture punishes bad news or humiliates whistleblowers,
They will stay silent. The deviance will silently embed itself in the system until the entire structure collapses.
the book makes a really sharp observation here, too. It points out that organizational sarcasm, when you see employees constantly rolling their eyes at a new management initiative or a safety protocol, is not just a minor personnel annoyance.
It is a blazing red diagnostic signal that psychological safety is dead and deviance is likely normalizing in the shadows.
So we have the emotional radar of sentiment and the behavioral guardrails of psychological safety. But the author introduces a final element that binds all of this together: narrative.
And the claim the book makes here is audacious. It argues that narrative strategy is ultimately more powerful than capital allocation or operational efficiency.
Let's unpack that, because it sounds almost mystical, but the mechanics are actually intensely practical.
Very practical. The book argues that a compelling strategic narrative acts as a literal gravitational force. It is the story that pulls investor capital toward you, aligns the erratic behavior of thousands of employees, and shapes how the market perceives your value.
So data and financial metrics are absolutely necessary, but they are deployed within the narrative to give it weight.
The narrative itself is what shapes the corporate reality. Think of it this way. The narrative isn't just the glossy paint job on the car.
The narrative is the engine.
Yes, a powerful story about the future will convince investors to give you the capital you need to actually build the reality you are describing.
So the story pulls the reality forward. You tell a compelling story about revolutionizing an industry, investors believe it and fund you. You use that funding to hire brilliant engineers, they build the product.
And suddenly, the story you told 3 years ago is now operational reality. The narrative willed it into existence.
However, the author includes a very stark, very dangerous warning about what he calls narrative sustainability.
Well, this is crucial. You, as a leader, must obsessively manage the gap between the narrative claims you are making publicly and the actual operational reality inside the company.
Because for a while, a strong story will carry you. It attracts the capital and the talent. But eventually, the physical results must appear to validate this story.
The text calls this the reckoning moment.
And if that gap between the grand story and the mediocre reality becomes undeniable, The gravitational pull violently
The
reverses.
narrative collapses. Investor confidence vanishes overnight, capital dries up, the top talent flees to competitors, and the market aggressively reprices your company downward. You simply cannot fake the operational reality forever.
Which brings us to the most practical question of the entire deep dive. If sentiment, culture, and narrative are the invisible forces dictating survival, how does a company actually build the physical radar station to track all of this? How do you systematize this kind of awareness?
We have to operationalize it. And the book details exactly how to do this by establishing a corporate intelligence function, or CIF.
And it breaks the creation of a CIF down into 5 distinct phases, which the author calls the 5 circles.
Right. So the first circle is perception. This is foundational. You cannot just hire a junior analyst, put them in a windowless office, and call it a CIF.
The executive team must explicitly position the CIF as an inherent critical thinking coefficient that applies to every level of the organization.
Exactly. It must have a dedicated protected budget and a direct line to the C-suite.
The second circle is methodology. This is where you define your intelligence needs and map your blind spots.
And the author uses the classic intelligence matrix here, which most people probably know is the Donald Rumsfeld matrix.
Right. You categorize your knowledge into 4 buckets. The known knowns things you understand well.
The known unknowns questions you know you need to research.
The unknown knowns intuition and hidden internal knowledge.
And the most dangerous category, the unknown unknowns. The text emphasizes that as the physical size of those unknown quadrants expands, the existential risk level of the entire company skyrockets.
So the CIF's primary job is to aggressively shrink the unknown squares.
That's it, which leads us to the third circle, which focuses on sources. The book visualizes this as an expanding spiral.
You start close to home, gathering intelligence from internal employees and direct interactions with immediate competitors.
Then the spiral moves outward to suppliers, industry conferences, and eventually reaches the macro level of academic scholarly works and shifting geopolitical regulations.
Which leads right into the fourth circle, the mixture. How do you actually combine all these sources?
The author introduces a framework called the intelligence box, or TIPAB. This box forces a company to map its capabilities across 4 specific axes.
Let's list those. Business intelligence, BI. Competitive intelligence, CI. Market intelligence, MI. And knowledge management, KNOM.
Let's expand on this because visualizing the TIB is incredibly revealing. Business intelligence is mostly internal, like, do you know your own sales numbers, your inventory, your fuel costs?
Right. And market intelligence is macro. Do you understand the demographic shifts or regulatory changes in your industry?
Competitive intelligence is focused on your rivals. What are they launching next month? And knowledge management is how well you store and share all this data internally.
Exactly. And when a company honestly evaluates itself and plots its capabilities on these 4 axes, it almost never draws a perfect balanced square.
Oh, almost never. Usually you get a highly warped, misshapen polygon.
You might have massive BI. You know exactly how much a paperclip costs in your Chicago office, and great MI, the European market is growing, but you might have absolute zero CI.
You have no idea that your biggest rival is secretly buying up all the supply chain capacity for the next 2 years. That warped shape instantly highlights where your intelligence blind spots are.
And to fix those blind spots, you arrive at the 5th circle, implementation. You have to hire dedicated, full-time professionals, not just someone doing this off the side of their desk, and provide them with specialized tools.
And a massive portion of their time is going to be dedicated to that CI quadrant, competitive intelligence. But we really need to clarify something very important here because the book is strict about this distinction.
Yes, the author is unequivocal. Competitive intelligence is ethical, legal monitoring.
It is completely distinct from corporate espionage or spying.
You are not hacking servers. You are not bribing employees. And you stay strictly on the right side of the law. You are simply applying rigorous analytical methodologies to signals that are already out there in the public domain.
Right. And the text categorizes these public signals into what it calls the 5 strategic nerves of a competitor. These are the areas you monitor constantly: HR, portfolio, branding, management, and finance.
So let's put this into a real-world scenario. If I am the CEO of a mid-sized logistics firm and I don't have the budget for a 20-person intelligence unit to monitor every single thing my rivals do, which of these 5 nerves should I be watching closest?
That's a great question.
Which one twitches first to give me the earliest warning of a strategic threat?
While all 5 are critical, the human resources nerve HR is almost always the earliest leading indicator.
Why HR?
because human capital must precede operational execution. You simply cannot launch a revolutionary new product without hiring the people to build it months in advance.
Right. If I'm monitoring my rivals' job postings, and they have historically been a traditional trucking company, but suddenly they are mass hiring lithium-ion battery engineers, cloud infrastructure architects, and government lobbyist liaisons in Washington, D.C.
They haven't announced anything publicly, but they are absolutely broadcasting a massive pivot into autonomous electric fleets.
The HR nerve twitched 6 months before the press release.
Exactly. Or, conversely, if you see them quietly laying off their legacy manufacturing supervisors while simultaneously offering massive signing bonuses for customer success managers, they are pivoting their entire model from hardware sales to a service-based subscription.
Wow. Okay, what about the other nerves?
Well, the portfolio nerve is the actual product mix they offer. Branding is how they talk to the market. If a rival goes from zero advertising spend to a massive multi-channel campaign pushing budget-friendly solutions, they're clearly targeting a new cost-sensitive demographic.
And the management and finance nerves are vital for spotting weakness,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Hmm.
If you notice a competitor's C-suite is turning over rapidly, like 3 CFOs in 2 years, that management nerve is screaming that there is internal chaos.
On the finance side, if a historically aggressive rival suddenly stops paying dividends, halts their expansion plans, and starts selling off non-core real estate assets, that is a massive distress signal.
They are playing defense, hoarding cash, and that is your cue to press your advantage.
Yeah.
The primary function of the CIF is to continuously log these nerve twitches over time
Recognize the underlying patterns before the market does.
and translate those patterns into actionable battle cards for your sales teams and strategic recommendations for the board.
Okay, so we've built the radar, we are tracking the nerve twitches, we know exactly what our competitors are doing today, but strategy isn't just about reacting to today. It's about anticipating the end game of the entire market.
Right.
This brings us to the final theoretical section of the book, moving from daily operational monitoring into grand structural market theory.
And to transition into this macro view, the author brings back the grandfather character, but this time in a story set during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic.
It serves as a really visceral, micro-level example of how rapidly reality and probabilities can shift.
In the story, a grandmother hesitates to watch her grandson simply because he has a mild sore throat.
Right, a totally mundane family dynamic, a kid with the sniffles, is suddenly perceived as a potentially lethal threat to the grandparents.
The lesson being that the new normal can shift overnight. What was considered strange or paranoid a year ago is standard operating procedure today.
This fluid reality requires leaders to constantly reassess the probability of different futures.
To manage this uncertainty, the book outlines 3 distinct intelligence thinking patterns. And the most crucial of these is the third pattern, which the author calls backward induction.
This is essentially a pre-mortem analysis, right? Borrowing heavily from game theory.
Exactly. Instead of starting it today and trying to guess the future, you force your brain to work in reverse. You select a theoretical future outcome, even one that seems highly marginal or unlikely, and you meticulously map the sequence of events backward that would have to occur to lead to that specific outcome.
So by unfolding the timeline backwards step by step, you can assess whether the foundational triggers for that impossible future are actually happening right now.
It forces the executive team to prepare for black swan events rather than just projecting a straight line of 5% growth forever.
It is a phenomenal mental exercise. But it serves as the setup for what I genuinely believe is the absolute crowning theory of this entire book.
The concept that redefines everything we've talked about so far.
The Redistribution League. When I read this, it completely broke my understanding of classic competitive dynamics.
It is a paradigm-shifting concept. We are deeply conditioned, through traditional sports and basic game theory, to view competition as a zero-sum game. The winner takes the trophy, and the loser goes home with absolutely nothing. Their efforts are erased.
But Web Intelligency argues that macro-level business simply does not work that way.
Not at all. In the Redistribution League model, when a company ultimately wins a competitive market cycle, they don't just win their own market share.
They literally absorb the market-building efforts, the consumer education, and the infrastructure investments of all their defeated rivals.
Let's expand on the basketball analogy you used earlier, because it illustrates the absurdity and the reality of this model perfectly.
Okay, let's go back to that.
Imagine a basketball game where the rules are fundamentally altered. The winning team doesn't just get a check mark in the win column. When the buzzer sounds, the winning team is allowed to take every single point the losing team scored, pull them off the scoreboard, and permanently add them to their own historical record for the next season.
It changes the entire nature of the game. In a zero-sum game, you want to hold your opponent to 0 points. You want to stifle them completely.
But in the redistribution league, you actually want them to score points, provided you ultimately win the game.
Exactly. Let's ground this in historical business reality. Think about the smartphone market. For years, BlackBerry and early mobile pioneers spent billions of dollars and endless effort educating the global enterprise market on why they needed mobile email and constant connectivity.
They built the psychological infrastructure of the mobile workforce. They scored massive points.
But when Apple entered with the iPhone and ultimately won that market cycle, Apple didn't have to spend a dime re-educating the public on the value of mobile email.
BlackBerry had already paid that tuition for them.
Apple absorbed BlackBerry's score. The same thing happened with Amazon. Barnes & Noble spent decades cultivating a culture of book buying and browsing. When Amazon won the cycle, they absorbed that massive pre-existing consumer behavior. They inherited the infrastructure their rival built.
This realization leads to a deeply counterintuitive strategic posture that the text calls the leader's dilemma.
Oh, this is fascinating.
If you are the dominant player and you are highly confident in your ultimate ability to win the current competitive cycle, you actually desire strong rivals.
It blew my mind. You want your enemy to invest heavily.
If your rival is willing to spend $50 million lobbying the government to open up a new regulatory pathway, or spending a fortune on television ads to convince consumers to try a new product category, you let them do it.
You want them expanding the total addressable market because you know you're eventually going to conquer that expanded market.
But, and this is the critical caveat, you have to practice what the author calls threshold management. You must allow them to score points and build the market, but you must carefully and surgically neutralize them right before they cross the winning threshold.
Right. You let them run the marathon, but you trip them at mile 25.
Exactly.
If you crush them at mile 1 through aggressive price cuts or lawsuits, they exit the market with a score of 0, and you lose all that free market development they were going to fund.
You have to keep them viable enough to spend their capital, but weak enough that they can never actually overtake you.
It requires a masterful, almost chilling level of strategic patience and intelligence gathering.
And the author is very clear about the intellectual lineage here, acknowledging predecessors like Brandenburger and Nailboff's concept of co-opetition and Joseph Schumpeter's macro theory of creative destruction.
But the Redistribution League synthesizes these academic ideas into a highly operational, ruthless framework for long-term corporate dominance.
It forces you to view your fiercest competitors not just as enemies to be destroyed, but as unwitting partners who are financing the expansion of your future empire.
Which brings us to the final section of our deep dive. Because the author refuses to leave these massive theories hanging in the theoretical boardroom, he reforces them into the real world on a geopolitical scale.
Yes, the book concludes with a fascinating, extensive appendix titled A Deep Dive into Europe 2035.
It takes the Redistribution League and applies it to an entire continent.
It frames the European Union itself as a living, breathing participant in the global redistribution league, competing against the US, China, and emerging markets.
The report is a highly impartial, unflinching examination of a severe fragmentation crisis currently facing the EU. It projects the social, economic, technological, and governance challenges Europe must navigate over the next decade.
And to structure this analysis, the author brings back Michael Porter's tools one last time, specifically utilizing Porter's diamond model to systematically assess Europe's competitive position on the global stage.
The analysis is rigorous. Applying the diamond model, the report points out Europe's mixed strengths in factor conditions, like high education but lagging tech infrastructure.
It highlights a massive but insufficiently demanding and heavily fragmented internal market, and it points to a disjointed governance structure that actively undermines overall continental competitiveness.
The report outlines several potential futures, but the most probable scenario projected through 2035 is a trajectory of managed decline, unless massive, systemic strategic reforms are enacted immediately.
It is the ultimate real-world test of the book's entire premise. Europe's strategic planning today, its ability to formulate a unified vision and gather the intelligence to execute it, will absolutely dictate its survival and its rank in the global redistribution league tomorrow.
It is a profound, heavy way to conclude the text, proving that these theories govern everything from a two-pizza engineering team at AWS to the economic survival of a continent.
It really is. And for you listening, if you want to explore these frameworks and apply them to your own strategic challenges, we need to let you know that the book is based on original writing.
Yes, and we want to tell the audience that whoever is interested in supporting this cause and encouraging the writer to publish more books should purchase the book online or in paperback.
Absolutely. The author has also specifically asked that listeners recommend the book to their networks and provide feedback to help improve and shape future publications. The ideas here are meant to be debated and applied.
And if you want to take that debate directly to the source, for more information on a chat with the writer, contact Amir L., CEO of Web Intelligency at info@webintelligency.com. That is info@webintelligency.com.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We moved from the operational plumbing that birthed AWS into the psychological safety required to stop the normalization of deviance,
Through the economics of the intelligence marketplace.
all the way up to the grand macro strategy of the redistribution league.
We have. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over when you go back to work tomorrow. Think deeply about that redistribution league and the leader's dilemma.
It's a game changer.
Look at your own specific industry right now. What if the competitor you are trying so frantically to destroy today is actually the very entity building the market infrastructure you are destined to inherit tomorrow?
It really reframes everything.
Keep that in mind the next time you look at a rival's massive marketing spend or R&D budget. Are they beating you, or are they just unwittingly financing the construction of your future empire? Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.